Hello and welcome to this, the fifth in the Historic Pubs of Wales series. Today coming to you from the stunning countryside of Monmouthshire in southeast Wales. Now, in these videos, we look at pivotal moments in British history and look at the scars that they left on ordinary people by visiting ancient inns and taverns of Wales. Today, we're looking at one of the great levellers of British history, the Reformation, and how two pubs in particular in this county have the scars to bear.
They are the White Hart in Llangybi, on the road between Caerleon and Usk, and the Robin Hood Inn in the town of Monmouth. But first, let's just remind ourselves what the Reformation was. In 1517, at Wittenberg in Saxony, a former Augustinian friar named Martin Luther wrote a list of 95 grievances with the conduct of the church and nailed them to the doors of the city's cathedral.
His ideas wouldn't have seemed so radical today, but at the time they were incendiary. All he really wanted was the church to clean up its act.
He certainly didn't intend to start a new Protestant movement, but he met staunch resistance from those who were running the church at the time, especially Pope Leo X. He and Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire declared Luther a heretic, but one of Luther's supporters, Frederick III, also known as Frederick the Wise, Elector of Saxony, whisked him away before he could get arrested and put him up in Wartburg Castle, where he could continue his work and spread his ideas. Now bear in mind that the printing press was a brand new invention at this point in history, so for the first time it was suddenly possible for one man's vision and ideas to reach thousands, and Frederick's deep pockets made it possible for Luther and other like-minded theologians to publish their ideas right the way across Europe. What he'd started drew in like-minded academics like Calvin and Knox. Their ideas and proposals for a different kind of church grew arms and legs, and pretty soon a split from Rome became inevitable. The established church was furious at this and came down heavily on anyone who thought or publicly declared that they thought that Luther had a point. So the likes of Thomas Cromwell, who was both a Protestant and also Henry VIII's right-hand man, kept their views to themselves. That is, until they sensed that something of an opportunity might have presented itself. The petulant king had fallen out with Pope Clement VII when he refused to grant him a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon.
How dare he? Does he not realise that you are the king? And that you rule by God's will? And that you need an heir?
It's very easy to see how this situation could have been manipulated, and it worked a treat.
Henry secretly married his mistress, Anne Boleyn, who also happened to be a Protestant, and the Pope excommunicated him for doing it. So in 1534, only 14 years after Luther started the ball rolling, Henry passed the Act of Supremacy, making himself head of the church in England, and that was that. The church in England was severed from Rome overnight.
These changes did not go down well with everybody.
It's fair to say that we in Wales like to hang on to the old ways, to keep old traditions alive. That's true of our language, and it's also true of our religions. So, for example, as recently as the 19th century, you would still quite commonly see people celebrating the belting right the way across Wales by lighting bonfires every May. This is a practice dating back thousands of years. It's the observation of a pagan act of worship, celebrating the rise of Beli, the god of summer. Yet it continued throughout Wales long after we had supposedly moved on from paganism. Even in the lifetime of my own grandparents, it was common to see children leaving church on a Sunday in Wales, joining hands to dance and sing in a circle around the yew trees in the churchyard. Again, a pagan ritual, but it carried on for centuries after we supposedly had let go of pagan ways and had embraced Christianity.
Religion was always a very emotive subject in Wales, and in the 16th century, people's approach to faith and worship was very personal and something that they took very seriously. And it was not something that they particularly wanted to change. And when the Act of Supremacy was introduced, most ordinary Welsh people were opposed to it.
Now, don't get me wrong. There were some people who were absolutely delighted with this arrangement. It is exactly what they wanted, and they could not believe their luck that their king was supporting them in their beliefs. Then there was another bunch of people who just went along with it because, for
For ordinary people, being seen to defy a king was not a very healthy path to pursue. They loved their king, and they thought that he ruled in the name of God. But the church, surely matters of the church, should be left to the Pope and go deciding things without his cooperation. Can you?
A pub that bears a lot of the scars of this conflict is the White Hart. Its history, like so many great old pubs in Wales, is inextricably intertwined with that of the church. This whole area between the church, its grounds, and the pub, and these buildings dotted around, are believed to be the remains of an ancient monastery, established either by St. Cubby or, more likely, some of his followers. He was a 6th century Cornish saint who was also very active on Ynys Môn, so this monastery is quite possibly 1,500 years old.
The building that the pub stands in today is believed to have been converted from the part of the old monastery that was originally the dormitory and the living accommodation, the quarters essentially for the monks who worshipped there. This is relatively common because you see the same thing at the Cross Keys in Swansea and, of course, Plough and Harrow in Monknash, which, of course, is the subject of the first in this series of videos, where we even reconstruct the monastery that the pub was once part of. Please subscribe to this channel and check it out after this video. But that's not all this place offers us in terms of a connection with the Reformation. Once Henry VIII had reformed the church, his next move was to dissolve the monasteries between 1536 and 1541. That meant that the monastery that had been on this site was sold off and the buildings converted into secular use. That's why the architecture of the White Hart is 16th century. This was part of the monastery. It was then converted into a house. But in a strange twist of fate, it was to find itself in the hands of Henry VIII himself.
The family that purchased this particular monastery here in Llangybi was the Seymour family, and the Seymour family lived in Penhow Castle in southern Monmouthshire. What was to come to bear was that one member of the Seymours, namely Jane Seymour, was to rise above the station of the rest of the family by becoming Henry VIII's third wife. And the building that the White Hart now stands in was gifted to Henry as part of her dowry. So now we have this strange twist of events where a former monastery becomes a house that is bought by Protestants, that is gifted to the king of all Protestants in Britain, Henry VIII himself. What a lot of Protestantism! It was, we have evidence to suggest, squarely at odds with the views and beliefs of the people who actually lived here.
For the next 150 years, anti-Catholic feeling in Britain was at its height. People who refused to conform to the new church, people who wished to pursue the old faith, needed to do so in secrecy, because discovery would inevitably lead to arrest, torture, and possibly even execution. So those who wanted to continue with Catholic Mass needed to do so in secret. And they also needed to make sure that they were able to conceal and hide away any evidence that these masses had taken place, including being able to hide away the priests themselves. Now, there are countless old pubs which claim to have secret passageways. This one genuinely does. And you may not realise it, but I'm sitting next to it right now.
Behind this unusually deep fireplace there is a low, dark passage with a small flight of steps leading to a small recess. It's been filled in, but this was clearly a priest hole, a place in which to hide your Catholic priest from Protestant authorities when they came knocking. You can even see the outline of where there would have once been a stone plinth to cover it up to make sure that its discovery was beyond the wit of any soldiers. We have quite a graphic account of a priest being discovered in their hiding place, and it comes from rather an unlikely source. The nursery rhyme Goosey Goosey Gander, made popular by Beatrix Potter, may sound innocent enough, but it actually tells a rather ominous story. If you pay close attention to the words, it becomes clear that it's all about a detachment of soldiers ransacking the house of a Catholic family, looking for the priest they had hidden away, and what befell the unfortunate fellow when he was discovered. Goosey, goosey gander, whither shall I wander? Upstairs, downstairs, and in my lady's chamber. There I met an old man who wouldn't say his prayers, so I took him by his left leg and threw him down the stairs. There are layers in this verse. A lady's chamber, for example, is a hallowed place. So soldiers searching in there would have seemed a terrible invasion of privacy and decency. However, the fact that this is the place where an old man, in this case a priest, was hiding, would have seemed equally scandalous. The line saying he wouldn't say his prayers is a reference to Catholic priests refusing to read from the English Book of Common Prayer. And finally, and somewhat inevitably, we hear about him being thrown down the stairs. Sadly, this would have been just the beginning of some pretty brutal treatment. We also have evidence that resistance to the new church amongst the people who lived here was not exactly short-lived. There are accounts that a Jesuit Catholic priest from Abergavenny by the name of David Lewis came to the White Hart to preach because he was assured of a warm welcome here, but was banished from speaking at the church next door. He was ultimately arrested and condemned to death at the assizes in Monmouth. But that was in March 1679, 145 years after the Act of Supremacy. So for the people in this part of Monmouthshire, the Reformation was resisted not just for an initial period. Resistance spanned entire generations. Incidentally, he was also canonised to Saint David Lewis after his death.
So it's fair to say that the tenants here at the White Hart were definitely at odds with their new royal Protestant landlords. Most people in Monmouthshire were, but if we travel just 17 miles in this direction to the town of Monmouth, we come across another example of how people of this county would take extraordinary risks to rebel against these reforms, regardless of the potential cost to their own security.
This is the Robin Hood Inn. It is claimed to be the oldest pub in Monmouth, and this Tudor arched doorway, built in dressed stone, is a typical feature of buildings in this area during the mid-15th century, so its antiquity is pretty verifiable. Despite the great personal risk, the landlord here allowed the upper attic room to be used to celebrate Catholic Mass in secret long after the Reformation. We have evidence that the same thing went on at the George and Dragon in Beaumaris on Ynys Môn. When doing some renovations there recently, the owners discovered Catholic-inspired art painted onto the roof beams. It was the Sacred Heart, with a slogan which reads, Pax Deus vebis requiem, defuge Deus profebit noce, te ipsum, which translate loosely as, the peace of God will provide you rest. Conceal and evade, but know yourself.
Had these landlords been caught, they would have instantly been shut down. There is no doubt that the secret masses in the upstairs room here at the Robin Hood Inn continued for more than 100 years. In 1778, when political tensions had cooled enough for Catholicism to be given some form of resurrection, the Catholic Relief Act was passed. Now, it took another 15 years for the council here in Monmouth to act on this reform, but when it finally did, it was to the landlord of the Robin Hood that a licence to form a public Catholic chapel was granted. So there you have it. Once again, the historic pubs of Wales punching well above their weight when it comes to giving us a new perspective on any kind of historical matter, even one as broadly spoken about as the Reformation. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to read further around any of the matters that we've discussed, then they're covered in this book, Historic Pubs of Wales, available from all good independent bookshops and Amazon. So until the next time we meet, please enjoy your history.